Some decisions announce themselves. They give a man time to think, time to weigh the consequences, and time to talk himself in or out of whatever it is he is about to do. And then there are the other kind, the ones that make themselves fast and wordless before a man even knows he has made them. Holt Briggs would spend a long time afterward wondering which kind his had been. He was mending the east fence that afternoon when he saw her. The sun was 2 hours past its peak, the kind of heat that turns the air itself into something solid and pressing. He had been working steadily since morning, without much on his mind beyond the broken post and the handful of staples in his shirt pocket. His land was 22 miles of grass and scattered rock, with a creek that ran dependable from April through August. It was nothing spectacular by frontier standards, but every foot of it had been earned through 8 years of quiet and stubborn work. He did not have neighbors close enough to trouble him. He had chosen that deliberately. The movement caught the corner of his eye first, something low and fast through the dry grass on the far side of the slope, maybe 400 yards out. He straightened, shading his eyes with his forearm. For a moment he thought it was a deer. The figure moved with that same lunging, desperate quality of something running, not toward anything, but away. Then it rose and he saw it was a person. A young woman was running hard across the open ground, her dark hair loose and flying behind her. He watched her for a second or two, long enough to see that she was not slowing down or looking where she was going. She was just running, the way people run when every second of distance between them and what is behind them is the only thing that matters. Then he looked past her. On the ridge to the north, 5 riders had appeared. They were not moving at a run. They were moving at the deliberate pace of men who know they are going to catch what they are chasing and are in no hurry about it. Spread out in a loose line, unhurried, they carried rifles across their saddles. That unhurried quality was what made Holt's stomach drop. Panic is one thing. Patience in pursuit is something else entirely. He did not think about it after that point. He put down his fencing pliers, stepped through the wire gap, and walked toward the girl at a pace fast enough to cover ground, but slow enough that she would see him coming before he reached her. He raised one hand, not waving, just showing it was empty. She saw him when she was maybe 60 yards out. He watched her almost stop, almost break left or right, the way a frightened animal calculates escape. He kept walking toward her at the same pace, hands still up. After a moment, she kept coming because he was in front of her and the riders were behind, and one of those options was better than the other, even if it was not certain. She reached him, breathing so hard she could barely stand. Up close, she was younger than he had first thought. Early 20s, no more. Wearing a deerskin dress with beadwork along the collar that had come loose on one side. Her feet were in moccasins that had gone to pieces. She had been running a long time before she reached his land. He did not ask questions. He looked at her for 1 second, glanced back at the ridge where the 5 riders were still descending at their patient, terrible pace, and said, "Come with me." She understood enough English, or understood his tone, or understood simply the plain physics of the situation. She came with him. The barn was closer than the house. He put her in the back corner behind the hay and told her to stay down and not move. She looked at him once, a look he could not fully read. It wasn't trust exactly, not yet, but something like the preliminary decision that might eventually become trust. She lowered herself into the shadows between the stacked bales. Holt pulled the bay mare into the stall nearest the door and went to work on her left rear hoof with a pick, his back to the riders. By the time they came through his gate, there were 5 of them. 4 were men he did not recognize, dressed in the working clothes of ranch hands, but carrying themselves with a loose, watchful readiness he associated with men hired for their willingness rather than their skill. The 5th man he did know, at least by reputation, Whitmore Cole. Cole ran the largest cattle operation in the territory, 40,000 acres pushing steadily in every direction. His name came up in conversation the way a bad smell comes up in a closed room. You noticed it, moved away from it, and did not always say what you were thinking. Cole pulled up just inside the gate and looked around the yard with the expression of a man who owns things and is in the habit of looking at things he is about to own. He was in his late 50s, heavy through the shoulders, with a face that had the particular smooth quality of a man who had spent years making certain that other people did his worrying for him. "Briggs," he said. It was not a greeting, but an acknowledgement, the way you acknowledge a fence post. "Cole," Holt said. He kept working the pick along the mare's frog, not looking up. "What brings you out this way? Lost something?" Cole said, "Thought it might have come through here." Holt set the hoof down and straightened, wiping his hands on his thighs. He looked at Cole. "What kind of something?" "Apache girl," Cole said, tilting his head slightly. "Young, running. My men have been tracking her since this morning." Holt looked at the five of them, then back at Cole. "What did she take?" The question caught Cole for just a fraction of a second. "Property," he said finally. "What property?" "That's not really your concern." Holt nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he is deciding how much truth to put into his next sentence. "Haven't seen any Apache on my land today," he said. "Not running or otherwise." Cole looked at him, then looked at the barn. He was not a stupid man. That was what made him genuinely dangerous rather than just powerful. He was the kind of man who had gotten where he was by watching people carefully and understanding what they were not saying. "Mind if my men take a look around?" he said. Holt felt the specific cold weight of a moment he had known was coming but had hoped might not arrive quite this soon. He put his hands in his back pockets, took a breath, and looked Cole in the eye. "I mind," he said. The silence that followed had a shape to it. One of Cole's men shifted in his saddle. Another moved his horse a step to the left, positioning himself in case something started. Cole looked at him for a long time. "You're protecting her," he said. It was not a question. "I'm telling you there's nobody on my land that you have a claim to," Holt said. "And I'm telling you that you're welcome to water your horses at the trough and then go on your way." Another silence followed. Cole turned his horse slowly, looking around the property the way he had done when he rode in, assessing, calculating, storing away. Then he looked back at Holt with an expression that was almost pleasant. "All right," he said. "We'll take the water. Appreciate it." They watered the horses and rode out. Holt went back to the mare's hoof and listened to the sound of hoofbeats fading south. He waited 10 minutes after the last echo died before he went to the barn door and spoke into the shadows. "They're gone." If you're finding this story worth your time, go ahead and hit that like button for Dustin Hart Western Tales. It helps keep these stories coming. She told him her name was Ayana. She said it quietly, sitting in the yard an hour after dark with a tin of water that she drank in the small, careful sips. The night had cooled and the stars were out, bright and dense. Holt sat on the opposite side of the fire he had built, letting her take her time. He had learned long ago that the worst thing you could do with a person who had been running was make them feel they had to explain themselves before they had recovered enough to speak. The explanation came. She had been at the creek that ran along the eastern edge of Cole's territory, a creek her people had used for generations. She had gone to fill water skins before the rest of the group moved on. Two of Cole's men had been there. She described them briefly, one large and one with a scar below his left eye. They had not seen her, but she had seen them. They had been talking to an Apache elder named Chatton. He was old, she said, a man who had been traveling this road since before his hair turned white. He had documents, papers, in his hand. Cole's men had wanted the papers, but Chayton had refused. Then the larger of the two men killed him right there on the bank of the creek. When it was done, the man with the scar had gone through the elder's belongings and taken the papers, and the two of them had ridden back toward Cole's land. What they had not found was the small leather pouch that Chatan had pressed into the mud beneath the roots of a cottonwood before the confrontation started. It was as if he had known what was coming and tried to protect what was inside. Ayana had waited until they were gone, then crossed the bank and found the pouch. Inside were maps and a land deed. She understood enough to recognize it as something significant, something Shaitan had died protecting. She had taken it and run. When the riders returned an hour later and found her footprints, she knew stopping was not an option. Holt sat with this for a long time. The fire crackled. He thought about Chaton's hands pressing that pouch into the mud. He thought about what a man has to believe about the future to make a gesture like that, protecting evidence when he knows he will not be there to tell anyone about it. He thought that was one of the braver things he had ever heard. "Where is it now?" he asked. "The pouch." She put her hand to her dress, just below the collar where the beadwork had come loose. She had stitched it into the lining. Holt nodded. "All right," he said. He stood up. "We need to think carefully." Subscribe to Dustin Hart Western Tales. There are more frontier stories coming, and you won't want to miss where this one leads. The problem with thinking carefully was that it required options, and options required understanding exactly what Whitmore Cole was willing to do. A man who would kill an elder in broad daylight was a man who had decided certain things were worth the cost. That kind of man did not leave loose ends. Ayanna was a loose end, the pouch was a loose end, and now so was Holt Briggs. He had one thing in his favor. Cole had not searched the barn. Something had held him back. Perhaps the calculation that a fight that day was premature, but that kind of restraint was temporary. Holt went inside and looked at a hand-drawn map. The nearest town with a law office was Sulphur Creek, 16 miles south. The sheriff there was a man named August Ferris. The problem was that Cole had considerable influence in Sulphur Creek. The general store, the bank, and several large landowners were all tied to him. Walking into Ferris's office with a land deed and a story about Whitmore Cole would require Ferris to be either very honest or very brave. Holt went back outside. Ayanna was looking at the dark rim of the northern ridge, her expression watchful. "There is a second man," she said, "in your territory north. He has been there since the sun started down. He is alone." Holt looked at the ridge. He could not see anything, which told him she was accustomed to reading darkness for things that did not want to be seen. "One of Cole's?" he asked. "No," she said. "He sits like someone who is afraid of being seen by Cole's men." Holt took his rifle and walked north. The man on the ridge was young, an Apache who had his hands out by the time Holt reached him. His name was Soka. He was Ayanna's cousin and had been following her trail since midday. The three of them sat on the ridge in the dark. Soka explained the full shape of what Chaton had been carrying. The papers were a deed and a surveyor's agreement recognizing a stretch of creek land as belonging to the Apache band under a negotiated agreement with the previous governor. It stood directly in the way of Cole's expansion, an effort 3 years in the making to consolidate the largest cattle operation in the territory's history. Chaton had gone to the creek to ensure the deed was preserved because he had heard rumors that Cole was looking for it. "Is there anyone else who knows what's in those papers?" Holt asked. Soka nodded. "My grandmother. She was present at the original signing." Holt decided he needed to go to Sulphur Creek the next morning. Ayanna told him that before the sun was up, Cole's men would be watching the south trail. She knew another way, a narrow corridor through rock formations to the east, invisible on any map. Ayanna rode behind him, giving directions through a mixture of words and gestures. They reached Sulphur Creek before the town was fully awake. Holt left Ayanna at the edge of town and walked to Ferris's door. August Ferris came to the door in his undershirt. Holt laid the pouch on the desk and told the story flatly. Ferris listened, poured himself cold coffee, and picked up the pouch. "This is Cole," he said. "Yes." Ferris was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've been waiting for 3 years for something I could actually hold in my hands. Cole's careful. His men do his worst work where there are no witnesses." He looked at Holt. "But there's a witness this time." "2 witnesses," Holt said. "The girl and an elder woman who was at the signing." Ferris reached for his jacket. He sent wires to the governor's office and a circuit judge, then rode out to Cole's land alone. Cole denied everything, claiming the girl was a thief and the papers were stolen. But the deed predated Cole's version of events, and the governor's office had a record of the original signing. When the circuit judge arrived 4 days later, he found Cole's clean version of events suspicious. Cole's two men were brought in for questioning, and eventually the weight of the lie became more than one of them wanted to carry. Ferris rode to Holt's ranch to deliver the news. The case was going to circuit court, and Cole's expansion was frozen. "The deed stands," Ferris said. Ayanna had been at the ranch for those 4 days, working with quiet efficiency. Soka had come and gone twice, bringing messages from their grandmother. "She says the rancher did not hesitate," Soka translated. "She says that is the thing worth knowing about a person." Holt received the words in silence. "Tell us in the comments. Would you have hidden her? Would you have faced those riders at your gate without knowing what would come next? We'd love to hear from you." Ayanna left on the 5th morning. The route was clear now and the creek would be safe. She stood in the barn doorway and said in steady English, "Chetan's family will know what you did." Holt thought about the old man pressing that leather pouch into the mud. "Chetan is the one who made it possible," Holt said. "I just held the door open." Ayanna unclasped a single deep blue bead from her collar and pressed it into his hand. Then she turned and walked away. Holt stood in the doorway, watching her go in the gold morning light. He put the bead on the shelf beside the door and went back to work. His land was still 22 miles of grass and rock, but something had changed. He had built his life around the idea that smallness was safety, but he realized that smallness kept too long could become a different kind of loss. What he had done those 5 days had not been small. He had entered into it without a guarantee simply because the thing he saw was wrong. The summer moved on. Cole's men were convicted, and Cole himself faced proceedings that stretched into the following spring. The creek rights were confirmed. The Apache band traveled the route the following summer without incident. Holt did not see Ayanna again until the 2nd July. She sat at his fence and waited for him to notice. He brought coffee and they sat on the porch steps. The world was still difficult, but the difficulty is different when you are not navigating it alone. Some things in a man's life are not about drama or speeches at high noon. They are about what a man does on an ordinary afternoon when a stranger is running across his land and riders are coming over the ridge. In that moment, a man finds out what he is made of. Holt Briggs had found out that afternoon, and whatever he was, it was enough. If this story meant something to you, leave a like and subscribe to Dust and Heart Western Tales. There are more stories from the frontier coming, stories of choices made in hard moments and the lives that grew from them. And tell us in the comments, have you ever made a decision like Holt's, one that announced itself in a single heartbeat and changed everything? We'd like to know.